Bit dark on you. That's not too bad.
Okay.
Okay, we're live, but we'll wait on a couple of moments, a couple of minutes, and maybe a couple of people might come on. I left my phone behind me at my home, so therefore I cannot share or notify people that we're on. I don't think it would take a great deal out of people's lives if they missed what we're talking about. So yeah, we'll hang on for a second, and somebody might get one of them sound check things. You know how you go 5-5 and 6-4 and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, what was that one? Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah, we'll kick off in a couple of moments. You'd think I had lots of stuff written down. I don't know why I even brought the book with me for.
3 watching now. I don't seem to have.
Could any one of those
I don't
3
seem to have an image. Oh, there we are. Yeah.
be sure it's us?
Yeah. It is, yeah.
I suppose we can. Well, the last time we did this, what happened was that when we come off the live video, all the comments that were previously on during the live conversation had disappeared after after it ended, the live event or live talk. So if that happens again, it isn't because we're deleting people's comments or not wanting to show them. There's something wrong with YouTube. Because it looks much worse when people look at a recorded video, no comments. It's like we're two fellas talking to ourselves. The theme of this will be nomadism and Irish travellers. And it doesn't matter if you don't like, dislike, hate Irish travellers. It's absolutely relevant because this is also Irish history. It's your history. It's our history. It's a shared history. So when Dylan's finished playing Solitaire, what's it called again?
Solitaire, is it?
Solitaire, is it?
Yeah.
Is that the game you play? How you done?
Yeah, it's very important.
Very good. Exercising the mind.
I'm just trying to share this this live stream.
I got you.
Yeah. Because someone forgot their phone. Yeah. So yeah. Keep going.
We're ready to go?
Well, almost, yeah. You can give the introduction on whatever it is. Nomads. What would be the main questions, or what would people want?
We'll soon find out.
I suppose we should make it clear as well. People can ask questions on this.
Well, basically, yeah, of course. As it's a live feed, we definitely encourage interaction. Any questions you might have, and why we're doing it, it's important. There's no escaping the fact that what has happened 10 years ago, 40 years ago, or 400 years ago still has knock-on effects today, such as the colonization of Ireland brought a different mentality. It brought an English language, and that is the language that we're using here today. So that's stuck. And the important thing I keep saying, I think it's worth mentioning, is that this is not anti-English, it's not anti-establishment, it's anti-state. It's not about being negative to any other community. It's not about blaming or playing the victim in historical events. It's about addressing the chronic health crisis our community are experiencing in 2019. Most of our community has a political life expectancy of 65. Most of our community does not get past the age of 44. There's a high epidemic of drugs, drug use, alcohol, anxiety, mental health issues, and increasingly high rate of suicides that exists in our community. That is not by the grace of God. That is political will and lack of will. So when we talk about travel-related issues today, I can assure you, if we go back far enough, we're talking about Irish people. We're talking about the Clan people, the systems, the society that once existed for 3,000 years, including the Brehon Law. All of these are part of traveller culture today, still exists, despite the fact that our cultural world has been destroyed. And what's left is a psychological mentality lingering to that old world, which is a Celtic world. So that's why nomadism will be discussed. And again, I'm joined with Dylan Foley, who's an archaeologist, also studied in some college in Galway.
Yeah, UCG, NUI Galway.
I should have known that. Next time I'll work on that kind of stuff. Yeah, Dylan gives a perfect framework to something that I've been experiencing all my life. Because since I was 5 years old, I could understand the difference between settled people and travellers. And the more I went on in life, I could see the different patterns within the settled mentality. In the same way you notice how guards are uniformed and they have a particular mannerism. In the same way you might see with linguistics, with specialised language. Solicitors have a specialised language, doctors have a specialised language, and these are all different types of mentality. So as a traveller outside of that, I do not belong into any one of them categories. So I guess, yeah, this is where we're coming from with TravVision. This is why we set up TravVision, is to create that platform. So Dylan is going to help us start us off, right? First of all, why is nomadism and why are we talking about it? Today, Irish travellers have been greatly affected by nomadism. And nomadism in a political sphere has been used as a political weapon against Irish travellers. Whether it was knowingly or unknowingly at the time, it ended up being another weapon because it excluded Irish travellers from an Irish way of life. The systems were put in place not to cater for an old Irish way of life. So, Dylan, tell us, where did nomadism come from?
Okay, where does it come
3 seconds.
from? Yeah, yeah, 3 seconds. Well, before we say exactly where it comes from, probably say from your introduction that there's two different things to understand about it. One is what you're talking about, the question of whether Irish people were nomadic, the reality of it, the Irish way of life, and how it used to be in the past, and then there's a separate question of like how have Irish people been characterized, and the political use of the term nomad, what it actually means to well, particularly under colonialism and things like that, or under even goes back further in a way to the.
Just explain what nomadism is, or do you?
Yeah.
Or a definition type, or do you have it? I know we should have looked it up.
We should probably have looked it up. Yeah. No. Nomad is anybody. I mean, people who don't live in permanent dwellings is probably the best way of putting it. In stone or fixed dwellings. I think really. Because it covers a lot of different aspects, but people who relied on herds of animals, things like this, who did not live in cities, is essentially the thing. It's contrast between the urban life and the urban mentality, more importantly, and rural life to some extent. Now, nomad would go a step further. Most rural life involved movement of some sort in the ancient past, but obviously. Cities have fixed population that doesn't really go anywhere, generally speaking. And I suppose nomad, I don't know what the exact definition of it is, but the contrast between the two ways of life has always been some sort of a seed of tension, shall we say, going way back into ancient history.
Well, even recent times, you can see the conflicts.
Even in the Bible.
Yeah. Well, I suppose a traveller, my understanding, a traveller perspective, not that I'm representing other travellers, or my views and my opinions are all pretty much my own. But I would say from a traveller perspective, nomadism means a bit different what it seems to mean elsewhere. In other words, that when people say we were nomadic, we did not have land, we just roamed from one place to another. That's absolutely categorically not true, because the land we were roaming on was the land we were living on. It didn't mean we had the same kind of ideology as the landlord system. We didn't have that walls. We'd have pretty much open land. And even with going back far enough to the clans, even those who had castles were also semi-nomadic, despite the fact having a castle.
Okay, so yeah, you're right. Yeah, so we have a couple of things to deal with here. We go to the ancient origins of it, way beyond Ireland, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And also the Irish situation. So maybe we want to talk a little bit about the really ancient stuff just first.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Just like
okay.
I'd say that firstly, mostly pretty sure that we go really back into the Paleolithic, into really ancient history before the Ice Age and that. and human evolution and stuff, pretty much everybody was nomadic in some way, shape, or form. Especially after they kind of wandered out of Africa, and that the sort of definition of human life would have been nomadism, in the sense that they wandered around from place. They followed herds of animals.
So it's like a natural culture.
Humans had to walk around to get to the environment, always looking for that richer environment. You know what I mean? They did this for tens of thousands of years. What was a new thing in human history was the idea of sitting in one place, because you would never have sat in one place and have this idea that you would always have food there. That only comes about through agriculture. And so that arrives about 10,000 BC in 10,000 BC in the Middle East. And when you get the first sort of settled populations of urban populations, and they're very specific places in the world that develops along rivers, very rich areas where they have a rich river environment that can grow a lot of crops, but just outside that is desert, so you can't live there.
I got you, yeah.
If you know what I mean. And it's on those places where people are packed into a very rich place. They start to develop irrigation and they become urban life develops, but in a very specific part of the world. For a vast majority of people in the world, what we would now call nomadism, wouldn't have even had a word on it, because it was just human life. If you know what I mean, you wandered we went now in richer areas, people lived in cycle. Normally nomads would move in a cycle wherever the resources were. If you know what I mean, like. Animals do it, like bears and stuff, you know what I mean? It's the same thing. The salmon come in the river in a certain time of year in the spring or something. So you make sure you're there at that time. And then, berries appear at a different time. And you know what I mean? And there's a migration of deer or buffalo or something. So you make sure you're in the right place at the right time.
So obviously people wouldn't have survived if they weren't nomadic. Those who are nomadic seem to most be having a healthier lifestyle for not being in the one place. Well, they didn't run files, did they?
No, it's very true. That's very true as well. Going back into very old history again, like if we compare urban history to what we call nomads to some extent, or say the Paleolithic diet and that.
What's Paleolithic?
Paleolithic would be Old Stone Age. So long before, that would run from nearly all of human history up until about 10 or 1,000, until about 10,000 BC, up until about cave painting time. Up until around agriculture, really, you know what I mean? Mesolithic, they have whatever, they get into all these words, but it just means Old Stone Age.
All right.
And they're the guys who did the cave paintings, of the bison and the elephants and
cousins of my friend.
I don't know if elephants were involved actually, but anyway, woolly mammoths, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So those guys lived out on the open plains, and presumably were kind of partly nomadic, at least used to wander around. I mean, they did hunt these animals that moved huge distances. They use things like, what do you call it? Those kind of weapons, what do you call them? Boomerang.
Oh, boomerang, yeah. Slingshots and.
They presumably moved to some extent with herds. Now, of course, they couldn't quite keep up with them because they weren't, so they had to intercept them more often,
Yeah.
They wouldn't have been as fast as the animals.
So they kind of almost either cage them, hunt them down, trap them.
Yeah. Yeah. So and of course they'd have campsites that they'd keep returning to. So it's like nomads would just wander randomly, if you know what I mean.
The patterns.
Yeah.
Travelers used to do that as well, I suppose, with the split picking. You go particular times of the year, so that everyone would go at a particular time, particular place, and do that throughout the season. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's most rural, life was like that until, and like I'm saying, I'm contrasting it with cities. Cities were from the very beginning, the kind of when you're in the one place and you're maybe relying on grain and a couple of other plants. It's like from the very beginning, we see a drop in health. Like there's more people in the city, but they're less healthy. They eat a less variety of a diet.
How come?
Compared to hunter-gatherer type people who wander about and have great variety in the diet. You know what I mean? From part of the year, they might eat shellfish.
Was it part of just the food, or was it also hygiene?
Hygiene is poorer in cities without sanitation and all that kind of stuff, and disease is more rife for that reason. And the diet is much more restricted. In general, you're relying on grain, and therefore people's health and their teeth and everything. There's a lot more people, but they live shorter lives in general, unless you're a very rich person in the city, which also emerged in cities. That great hierarchy, you know what I mean?
But it seems it's pretty, whatever kind of life it was, nomadic. But people have this kind of image of Ireland that being nomadic was wet, miserable, dark kind of, environment. But the fact is that there was a go back far enough in Ireland, it was a very organised system, right? The problem we have now, it's seen the opposite. It seems to be some kind of failed human.
Yeah, okay. So there's two different types of the city thing is the grain farmers and that kind of people, and then there's another form of agriculture which is domesticated animals,
right?
Sheep and goats and cattle and things like that, and also very importantly the horse. In Ireland, Ireland is from ancient times a human settlement. Anyway, Ireland is a very what were we talking about before? It's a very rich, wet. It's a very wet country. I'm going to tell you that now.
Yeah. You don't convince me, my friend.
Ireland is a wet country. Ireland had, I think at least 10 months of the year grass grows in this country. So it was a great country for people who herded animals.
What would be normal anywhere else? Like, that must be pretty high.
It's pretty high, yeah. The fact that cattle can survive out all year round, don't have to be fed in barns and stuff like this.
So more hotter climate. The grass would have
arid. They would have to be given fodder in the summer. It doesn't happen in Ireland, generally speaking.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it does happen, but it's rare. And Ireland is like literally the land of milk and honey for animal herders. You know, and we know that like people who came here in the Neolithic came with cattle. That's in the 4000 BC. So these people are not. They are farming, but they're kind of what we'd call pastoralists, or more nomadic farmers, if you know what I mean. They move longer distances, and they have to move because they have to feed their cattle, and they have to be prepared to move if there's a drought in one area. If they can move far enough, they can feed their cattle elsewhere, you know, kind of way. So they tend to cover greater distances, and eventually those people came to Ireland with their cattle. And you know, later on, about 2000 BC, people who we now suspect might have been the beginnings of the Celtic society arrived with horses and stuff. But Ireland is not it's a rich country, but it's not in terms of grass and that kind of thing, but it's not a huge country.
Yeah.
So, but for pastoralists, this idea of rotating around the place with your animals, and in Ireland we know that it was something that existed right up until the 19th century, is what they call it in Ireland, bullion and stuff like that, where cattle are fed on the highlands in the summer, up on the mountains, and move down to the lower lands in the winter, and eat the grass in the winter there. That was a normal routine in Ireland for centuries. So a lot of the population would be on traditional circuits like that, where they would move up the hills or down the hills, or move to different areas at different times of the year. It's not, I mean, whether you want to call that nomadism is a whole other question.
A yearly outlay of where to go and what to do.
Yeah.
Particular times for fish, but berries, hunting, whatever.
Yeah, so that's a very ancient way, like, but also even for a more modern pastoralists, all right, they would have a circuit. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't, you know, within their own territories or what have you, they would move in a certain area to feed their animals. Essentially, that's as simple as that.
It seems to think in about a couple wrong with this. If nomadism in Ireland wasn't necessarily the same kind of nomadism elsewhere, this one was semi-structured. In other words, it had bases. It had a system.
Well, we're talking over huge amounts of time. So we're coming up right into the modern time. We're talking about Ireland was in the main a pastoral economy, because it was more suited to the country, to the climate. Yeah. Certain parts of Ireland, like in the southeast, where you can grow grain successfully, but most of the country is not great for growing grain. You can grow oats. They like a wet, cool climate, but small stands of oats were grown. The people were farmers. They were successful farmers, but the easiest way to make a living in this country is just to keep animals, because we have endless amounts of grass, you know, and so you know, your cattle herders and milk, and they provide milk and meat, and you know, and you have sheep and goats and what have you. That's a normal way of life. Now, what I would say is that we see that, like, having that implies that there's a certain mobility in the population to be able to move with your animals. You know what I mean? But not necessarily over great distance.
Why else would you move in Ireland even if you didn't have animals? What other reason would you have?
You'd have a reason if you had a trade of some sort. If you had trade. Okay, so out of the little countries in Ireland in Gaelic society, you had what we would call like a special pass to across countries. To move across territory boundaries. They used to have a stick that allowed you to do this, would you believe? Obviously, messengers. It was Messengers carried a special stick that would allow you to. It's like a white or a blackthorn stick.
What would the stick do?
It's symbolic of being under a certain protection. You're allowed to cross boundaries.
Like a passport type thing.
Yes. No, not everyone carried one of them, but diplomatic messengers, runners and messengers would carry them. Various other people with trades, like whether you be carpenters or any kinds of useful trades like that, could move within districts. But it would depend on who you were kind of sponsored by, in the sense of what your status was. If you were the carpenter for a single country, you move on a circuit within that country to do your job. What do you
mean country now?
I mean small Irish territory, like a little Tua.
How big was the country be in Ireland?
Well, there was 4 of them in County Sligo alone. So
4 countries in County Sligo.
Yeah, so they're tiny little local governments, shall we say? And each one though would have its own professionals, if you know what I mean.
Oddly enough, not too long ago, but when there was certain conflicts going on between travellers, and unfortunately that's one of the things that existed. But one of the things would be that if there was a conflict between families, they would either agree to stay out of each other's town, although it wouldn't be their town, but it's almost like staying out of my country.
Yeah,
that's why they're claiming countries. Same mindset.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, does sound very similar. Yeah, because each one has its own. I've said that last video. Like in Ireland's conditions, each little territory, they're very dispersed local government. Each one has its own little chief. Each one has its own mini army, its own mini courts, its own very, a very flat system, not a centralized hierarchy.
Yeah.
And so, part of the reason for that is that the urban.
So it's a bit brief. Say the system you're talking about, which I know, I pretty much feel I know.
Yeah.
Is it the hierarchy part you're talking about? The power didn't ascend upwards down to a handful of people. It went about more level, is it? It
did ascend. It did to some extent, in that groups of countries were grouped together into confederations, which had a chief, an over-king, and then they're grouped together into ones that might have a provincial king.
Sounds a bit like a Japanese setup, is it?
Similar to the Japanese daimyo, they call them lords, and han are the little countries.
The clans would work together even if they didn't like each other.
So they're all clans and they're all related, and of course you're in a better position. If you're related to the King of Connacht, you're in a better position as a clan than other clans. That's true. You get all the better jobs, that kind of stuff. But it's important to know that the King of Connacht could not, if outside his own territory, he could not change the law within an individual country. He couldn't dictate the laws in that country.
Okay, so
the local lord had the power, even if he was the overlord. Do you understand what I mean?
Okay, the overlord couldn't dictate even to the laws of each country.
Not like an English or French king or something that could make the law for everybody. The King of Connacht couldn't make the law for everyone. He could only make the law at the level he worked at, if you know what I mean. Now, individual countries go to him to solve disputes between themselves.
Yeah, it makes sense.
He doesn't tell an individual country what the law is in that country.
What's interesting about that, because I'm sure
that's what I mean by dispersed authority.
I think if travellers are watching this, they agree or disagree, but I'm going to speak again for myself, my own experience as a traveller, and I suppose my own family context, as clan, whatever you want to call it. There would be that mentality, absolutely, that if there's conflict going on and the overspill of it is greater than the incident itself, you might allow other travellers to intervene as peacekeepers, peacemakers. They would negotiate with both sides. If it came down to a one boxing match to resolve it, good and well. That was a lot better than going all out war. But I tell you these things because they still exist in our mentality, our culture today.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about one country and 2 countries going to the overlord or overking to resolve these issues, that's identical how we do it today. And pretty much when there's an incident, they go to someone who's well respected, someone who's almost neutral. But at the same time, that one can't dictate to us. And they can't dictate to the other crowd. They can't make the law for us. But we can go to them to iron it out.
Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. So that matches what I'm sort of describing, because I've got the kind of book version of it, but that's it in reality. Yeah,
it sounds
it's this interesting system, because when I say there's a King of Connacht or something, people think, oh, he's a king, so he can like tell people what to do.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
But actually, he can't. Weirdly enough, if you know what I mean. Of course, decisions made at that level.
The king, I think I only learned this through yourself, to be quite honest, yeah. But when we say king, queen, clans, we're now in an English mentality as such, that we are speaking it. So therefore, most people who are in this mentality would view that in the same way they might think of an English castle, English queen, English king. But the systems were completely opposite, were they not?
It's very different, yeah.
Yeah, very different.
So the king is actually an elected king, partly elected anyway. He's elected out of the various clans that are entitled to elect the king, if you know what I mean.
I'll tell you
so not everybody is allowed. Not everybody's not full democracy by any means, but it's semi-democratic, yeah, kind of.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of travellers would know this, but again, because we had our leaders, although they stopped calling themselves leaders when the guards were clamping down on them. But again, from the guards' point of view in the state and the settled, they were just looking at a bunch of people killing each other. In this side of the world, over here, this was a whole complete different history. We were sorting out things very normally, even if it looked like it was something of a Braveheart. That was normal to us. That's why we were resolving them. But yeah, go on, sorry.
Yeah, but that's another subject. It's probably not to do with Are we getting back to where we go? That's similar. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, we take a question, all right? Because we've got questions coming up, and my family disowned me if I keep talking about it. All right, MJ van der Paas. Well, greetings. I think we could be related. Greetings from Scotland. Definitely could be related. We very much appreciate your informative channel. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you very much, MJ van der Paas. The reason I can say Van der Paas pretty quick because I love the darts. And Holland has some brilliant dart players, Van Gerwen and all those guys.
That was a nice, easy question.
Yeah, please keep the questions coming. All right, I suppose the other thing about we're talking about the countries, and just what people is is when Dylan is over here. Dylan comes from a particular mentality, right? And I come from a particular mentality. And obviously every other person does, but that's down to mindset, and it's also down to realities, people's experiences. But when I come in here, I'm coming as a traveller that I think what I have is a collective, informative opinion based on my own experiences growing up. What I know of my own culture, what I know of my own history, what I know of my own family and the dynamics that goes into that. So in some ways, I guess I am an historian, but I never went to school to be one. Dylan has the other side of this jigsaw that's been plaguing and that has been killing our community, systematically killing our community, is that Dylan comes from an archaeologist background, but he also comes with an extra bit of grit in him because he comes from Sligo. And you mightn't believe it or not now, but we're planning to do a whole talk on Sligo very soon, because Sligo is one of the most unique places left on the planet in terms of colonization. It was never truly fully colonized. We ran the Normans out of it. We prevented Elizabethan conquest. Like, we're living legends. And I'm not just saying that to you. That'd be an episode on Sligo. And also, we were also talking last week about maybe doing a talk show on slash hooks and samurai swords. And again, it's because the Japanese culture is very similar, likewise, to traveller culture. I'd say, they had 200 years of a break of colonization, hadn't they? So they're allowed to kind of...
They blocked it. They were never really colonized.
No, we only were thinking right at the time.
The
1,224 years ago.
The Mongols tried it, failed.
And you see how we skip a little bit over all covering different things? Well, the only reason we do that because it's so much to talk about. And that's what Travel Vision's all about. We're going to talk about the things that we never talked about in terms of a traveller and a settled person coming together and taking hundreds and if not thousands of years of history and events and bringing them unfold, declaring Ireland as a new shared identity of mentalities. No more nationalism, no more right-wingism, no more fascism, no more racism. That's the simple plan, isn't it?
It shouldn't be a problem.
We should have
it sorted out in a few weeks.
Brilliant. Tune in for that. Okay, we'll take another question. Janet Crystal, could you explain about the original fifth Tua and how the chief's name came together?
How the chiefs came together? Okay, the fifth Tua.
I didn't know there was a fourth.
We're talking about the biggest. I think I know what she's referring to. Yes, the biggest organization in Ireland is provincial. Provinces were the biggest level of division, if you know what I mean, level of authority, if you know what I mean, in Ireland. Okay, so provinces are very old, and as we all know, there's 4 of them in the country now, isn't there? But the Irish for province is Cuaga or Cuica means fifths.
Oh, so like Ulster, Connacht,
Yeah.
Leinster, Munster are 4 provinces.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So there's 4 provinces now, but there was, as people know themselves, there was originally 5. The Cuaga in Irish means fifths. So there was obviously 5 provinces in reality. There was the 4 that we were familiar with, and then the 5th one, Meath, with Meaja, which literally means middle or centre, and the others are the north, south, east, and west. It's a very typical. Well, Ireland was organised in this kind of north, south, east, west, and middle thing system. There was a philosophy or a mentality behind that, very typical of Indo-European mentalities. You see it in India and other places. The concept of the world is there's that idea with the centre, and Meath is interesting because Meath is where the High Kings were supposedly. Now the High Kings cause a lot of confusion for exactly the reason we were talking about, because they're like, there's the High King, but he doesn't seem to have any proper authority over anything, except in Meath to some extent. And yet Meath is a peculiar one, because Meath is in the middle of Ireland. Westmeath would be the best description of Meath at the time. That's roughly the same area, and it's in Meath contacts every other province, so it sits between the 4 provinces, if you know what I mean. So Ulster and Munster would have, Meath would contact Munster at the north, Munster in the south, if you know what I mean, and Connacht in the east and west. But it functions kind of like a neutral zone, into which once you go in, like if Munster, for example, Munster and Ulster don't have a border, but Munster and Ulster could have a war with each other by going through Meath. And if they went through Meath, they wouldn't even interfere with the other provinces.
Oh, I got you. Yeah.
They go through Meath. It's literally like the neutral zone. Each one of them, Meath itself was divided into 4 quarters,
like the no man's land.
Yes, it was like the neutral zone in Star Trek. It was divided into 4 quarters, and each quarter was belonging to one of the provinces, if you know what I mean. So they had their own mini zone within Meath, if that makes sense. And in them, they had a gathering place in each one, if you know what I mean. So the one is in the Connacht area, and so Connacht could be the host of an all-Ireland gathering, but still on neutral territory. So
I will give a quick equivalence maybe to something like that for travellers. That if you had 4 big, large clans, and they're all about to go to war with each other, and this is only about 8 years ago. But if that was about to happen...
No, not a true story.
No, not really a true story, but an example. So they had 4 big clans, and they decided, look, there's one place people should be allowed to go where they're not interfered with. Let's get on with the business, let them do the bits and pieces. A bit like Clare Market. You know, all the travellers from all the country go there, and they kind of an agreement, let's not fight here. This is stupid. So that kind of an agreement. There's a kind of a zone in Ireland where the 4 provinces agree that whoever goes in there should not be interfered with.
Exactly. Yeah. So there is cases. That's why you see it's hard to understand Irish stories until you understand how Meath works, because like there's examples of like Munster having a war with Ulster, but you see if they had gone through the other provinces to get to Ulster, they'd have kicked off a war with those provinces automatically. So to avoid that, they have to go through Meath. So you could there's a famous one involving the famous example of that, an Irish comedy kind of story where it called they call it the big term is the intoxication of the Ulla, the drunkenness.
I remember she got drunk and ended up. Go on, tell me.
Yeah, that one where Cuchulainn and the King of Ulster have an argument about who's going to host this party.
Right.
And they agree eventually that the first half will be at Cuchulainn's house, or the King's house, I think, and the second half at Cuchulainn's house.
I just jump in there for a second. Yeah. Again, this happens at a lot of traveller events to avoid conflict from different clans. So what they might do is they'll have one part of the wedding one place, the other part of the wedding the other place, and then both places are peacified. That they got to share the one event and one didn't out the other.
Really?
Yeah, this is very common. Still happens.
That's hilarious.
Go on. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, because that would explain then why that makes a lot of sense when this story would have been really hilarious start to this story in terms of Irish. This is a very, very ancient story.
For you it is.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But anyway, so what was I saying? Oh yeah. First half at his house, second half. Yeah, so anyway, that's fine. They have the first half. Cuchulainn jumps up and says, right, all the army, all the soldiers, everybody the whole party has to head for my house now. So they do. But of course, they're drunk. So the Ulster army loads into chariots and heads off for his house and takes a wrong turn. Goes right through Meath without realising it during the night time. And when dawn comes up, they're all kind of sobering up a bit, and they feel terrible, and they don't recognize where they are though. So they have to send scouts up a hill, and the scouts go up the hill and have a look around, and they say, right, bad news. Good news is we know where we are. Right?
Yeah.
And they go, right, where? And they say, well, we're in Munster.
Or the war zone.
Yeah. The bad news is we're in Munster because there's an army mustering just over the other hill because we've just invaded it.
Oh my God.
So then they say, well, they're trying to decide what to do next, but they can't really get out of it because they can't back down as a matter of honor. They can't pretend that they can't tell the truth that they were drunk, took a wrong turn, accidentally invaded Ulster. So now they have to pretend that like actually they were doing it on purpose. Yeah. So there's no way out of this war.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. But they're all completely hungover and milled and been up all night. So and anyway, the story that's only the beginning of it. It goes on from there. But
a war was created.
Yeah, a war starts. Yeah,
so they accidentally got drunk, landed in a place they shouldn't have been. But instead of saying, "Look, we were a bit drunk last time, we got lost." Yeah. No, we're too.
Well, they couldn't back down then because Munster were already mustering an army, thinking, "Look, this is."
Yeah, what did?
But there's jokes to do with the kind of honor system, if you know what I mean. Like not joke, but it's like they're bound.
Joking too much.
Well, it's done in that way where people in Irish cultural understanding would understand why it is the Ulster Army can't just get out of this now.
Yeah.
Can't just say, well, because they've gone too far. But the important thing I'm saying is you can't really understand that unless you understand that Meath was Meath was the neutral zone. Because otherwise, how would the Ulster Army even get there? They would have had to go through Connacht or Leinster in the modern sense. You know what I mean? The modern world, you'd have to go through Connacht or Leinster to get to Munster. And if you had done that, that would have triggered a war. Them two would have defended themselves. You know what I mean?
So they went through the corridor or neutral zone.
Yeah. So Ireland was organised into these places. Every place had its little neutral areas. From one little territory all the way up to Connacht level, and then at a national level, Meath was the big one. And Meath, that's why Meath has places like Tara and Ishnok and various places that are the biggest gathering places for the whole country, where the big fairs were held.
Yeah.
Because they would be kind of like it's kind of like you're not on anyone's particular territory when you're there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the High King's job. He's kind of the neutral king.
It's almost also
it's quite sophisticated.
It's kind of a place saying, look, let's find one place where we can have peace and where there is no war.
Yeah.
And use that place for weddings and funerals and gatherings and
and it just so happens Meath is on some of the best land in the country. Which makes sense, doesn't it?
Fascinating.
Plenty of cattle, plenty of milk.
So
anyway, I think we've gone off.
Yeah, I think so. I think she's saying it's filth. Not Janet, Crystal's back to us, is it? F-I-F-T-H.
Fifth province, I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, would that be it? But no, you just talked about
I've just done it. Yeah, I've just talked about it.
Good. So basically, we're still on nomadism, and Dylan's given us we're pretty all over the place, but that's good. Because we're talking about as much as we possibly can.
I don't think we've cleared much up.
No, we haven't with nomadism. But nomadism is an ancient practice. Was there a conflict that come from it?
Yeah, okay, so this is important. The idea of cities and the city people and the herding people over time quite often came into conflict. I mean, I was saying to you, that's in actually Genesis in the Bible, where your man kills the other fellow with a spade. I think one of them was a farmer. I think the one with the shovel was a farmer. That makes sense.
Abel and
Cain and Abel. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So Abel was the herder, was he? Anyway, I have a dim memory of that, but I think that they say that story in the Bible is actually a version or commemorating that kind of thing happening.
It's an interesting one, because I was took from that, and I think that what I would have got from people for rejecting that story was the bit like two farmers killing each other over a piece of land.
Yeah, no.
But this is not. This is different. This is a sedentary life versus a nomad life.
Yeah, versus a guy with his animals, wanting to graze his animals. And of course, what grain farmers do is put up fences all the time, if you know what I mean, to try and stop animals grazing. So there's a conflict automatically. And of course, urban dwellers rely on grain, if you know what I mean. So it was the development of cities in the Near East, in the kind of Sumeria was the first, but it's modern Iraq. And the cities gradually kind of spread up into other parts of the world over time. And what comes from cities is all kinds of things. We're not going to go into all the history of it, but comes all kinds of things involving very hierarchical governments, centralized city states, and eventually empires. They also come from the Middle East. And it's the story of things like empires that is important in our story, isn't it?
Yeah.
The idea that nomads were wild and savage and beyond civilization is something that comes from that history as well. from the kind of urban history, urban society. Oh, we're the civilized ones.
Oh God, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And in
other words, we are normal. Why can you not be like us and be like everybody else and live in a house and live in the city? So let's go back thousands of years.
Exactly. Yeah. And city traders and people moved cities. That kind of life moved with traders up into the Mediterranean and into Greece and then Rome. And then Rome created the greatest empire we know of the ancient time in this part of the world. And Rome is the imperial, the empire.
Did Rome ever conquer Ireland?
No.
Didn't.
No, and that's the key thing we're getting to. Yes.
But it had.
So that means that cities, the city mentality and the empire kind of thing that went with it did not come here when it had conquered all the rest of Western Europe, from except for north of Scotland. I think it might be a Scottish person.
But that's complicated to have. But say Rome did conquer England.
Yes.
Built London.
Yes.
London give the orders to invade Ireland. Or whatever.
Yeah, a long time later. So
that mentality from Rome, city life, went to London. London came here and put it onto Ireland.
Yeah, so a long time later, cities came to Ireland with the Vikings, created trading posts that are cities, and then mainly slave trading and things like that. Yeah, which was fine from our point of view. Not saying slavery is, but that was the time. That was the economy.
They had another one in the west of Ireland, chopping people's heads off and sending them up to Dublin for money or something, was it?
Well, that was during the bad times.
I had to look at it.
During the conquest.
Was there ever a good time to have your head chopped off, my friend?
No.
But you all get the point. I'm trying to make comparisons. Different times, different mentalities, different people. So it's not about looking back and how did they do that and how did they live like that. It's just the time.
What I'm getting at here is there's a political thing. So the question about Irish life is interesting and all the rest of it. So did people move? Yes. Did they live in stone houses? No. Probably Irish society had developed to suit the pastoral nature of what was best in the country to use. You know what I mean? And the grass and everything was the best way to live here. Basically, it was very rich in that sense. So you didn't have to break your back growing endless amounts of crops.
So Ireland would have been born out of a nomadic.
It suited a pastoral economy,
yeah,
but it's not big enough to move massive distances either. So it develops small territories in which people move in circuits, traditional circuits.
You think about it, when you say that, you're talking about flying around with a Merc or something. When people are on a horse and carts and wagons, from here to Tuppercurry is a pretty long way.
Yeah, exactly. So the countries the country size probably represents about what you'd cover in a day.
Yeah,
and get back home again. Yeah, or whatever your little.
So the idea would be to go to the market. It'd be to go to feed the animals. It'd be to do business. Whatever. So it was rotated and it was designed and it was part of a system, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. And move your animals up to this area and move them back down. If you go up, people would go up and have little Boolean camps up the hills where they'd camp out with the animals to protect them from wolves and stuff like this. And what have you.
How does something that was once ancient Ireland, culture, natural, become something illegal in Ireland?
Yeah. Okay. So exactly, the Roman Empire, let's put it very plainly, had laws, things I think called the lex nullius or something like this. They were very concerned about law and the written law and all the rest of it. Now, the empire, being an empire, wanted to incorporate into its urban world, its very highly centralized world, complete opposite to what we've described in Ireland. Yeah. Where authority all goes to one place and one place only, Rome, that city, that's it. So they want everyone to look in that direction. Now, from their point of view, everyone outside Rome or the Roman system is a barbarian. That's true. The Greeks had that idea. It's not lots of people thought that kind of thing. But their excuse for that was, for being able to conquer land or take land, was that the lex nullius, I think, and there's a bit of controversy about that, so that's a whole other question. But anyway, as to whether it's official or not. But anyway, the point would be that basically the idea was that lands that did not have permanent dwellings on them were open for taking and could be incorporated into the empire, if you know what I mean. Because
that home did not fit the mentality of what a house should be in that mentality. So the English came and saying,
the idea
that's not a house.
The idea in the Roman idea was...
the Roman.
Just to say with the Romans that for them, the world outside was a big frightening place that involved all these massive tribes called Celts and Scythians and people like this, and they had all these legends and stuff, and they eat their own babies, and you know what I mean, all this kind of nonsense. But it was a propaganda. It was a propaganda partly for their own control of their own people inside the empire. You know, good to have an enemy outside, and there's lots of other complicated stuff to it. But the bottom line was that the idea that nomads were also equaled savagery and all the rest of it, but there was a political agenda behind it. Let's be clear, which was that it meant that they could justify to their own people and to others that why it was the empire needed to incorporate, take your area and start mining it, basically, and making money out of it. So that was fine, you know what I mean? They would continue doing that. Now, many centuries later, when Europeans discovered all these classical bits and pieces of Rome was long gone, you know, as an empire. But in the 15th and 14th, 15th, 16th century, the discovery of classical documents, the English began to create their own empire, and they were consciously copying Rome. And
wasn't there an element of Rome already in there, London? Mentality-wise.
There was, mentality-wise, yeah.
Because if they went there and build the roads and build London.
They did, but a lot had happened since, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
But you're correct. You're fundamentally correct in the sense that England was a centralized, had remained a centralized sort of a place since the Romans had gone.
Yeah.
But the structures had remained the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Even though German tribes came and all those kinds of
stuff.
Because
when they came to Ireland, were they not saying the exact same things as the Romans were saying about other nomads?
They were indeed.
Including the English at one time.
So they started as part of their empire. They basically just started. They said, look, the Romans used to do it, so we're doing it as well. They came under a lot of. They were very concerned to prove the Irish were nomadic. Let's put it that way. Even if the Irish weren't quite as nomadic as they were making out. So they used to draw us like with their images of Scythians, like from classical Roman times. They said the Irish are just like that then. The Irish wander from place to place.
Who's the Scythians?
The Scythians were these nomads up on the steppe, up at the outside Rome, up on the Russian steppe in modern Ukraine. They were beyond the Roman Empire. Romans were terrified of them, but the Romans held them out as being like the classic. They're the classic Roman image of a nomad, you know, a person who wanders on horseback, with his herds of sheep and what have you. To them, they represented everything that was wild and uncivilized and nothing and not urban.
Allegedly.
Yeah, exactly. If you ask the Scythians, it'd be the other way around.
Yeah.
Because they'd say, well, you know, you come here and totally destroy the place. You know what I mean? Make it unlivable, kill all the people, whatever. You know what I mean?
So the English came here, same mentality, same outlook, and then they were politicalizing nomads as something in their favour, was it?
Yeah, so there was no centralized state in Ireland until the English came.
Where is it now?
It's now we live in it. It's based on Dublin, obviously.
Well, that's what I mean. There was a centralized place even in Ireland.
Yeah, so Dublin was created. Dublin became over time not so much a slave trading post, but as the central point for under the British Empire after the 1600s.
Let's get this straight for a second, all right? Because I want to make people feel guilty that Dublin was created as a mentality construct, like a building.
It's a city.
Like
so the Vikings, as trading post, the Vikings created various towns around the country. Right. Initially in the 800s, and then
along came the English.
So they're the first time that those cities that had developed all those thousands of years ago back in Sumeria eventually came here. You know, basically, let's put it that way. And then the cities were never Irish in the sense that they were Viking to start with. Then they were English. The Normans took them.
So they were never what you call Irish.
No, over time they take on a character that's Irish, but they were not Irish in terms of where they, they were international trading posts would be the best way of putting it. And they were under English kings from the 12th century onward. They were loyal to the English kings. So all the walled cities in Ireland would be Limerick,
the Romans
Waterford, Dublin.
The Romans came to England, took up England, set up London, they left. The English then became the English, maintained that system, adapted that mentality, started saying the exact same things as the Roman was saying to them, went over to Dublin. Dublin now are saying the exact same thing about Irish travellers as the English said about the Irish, as the Romans said about the English. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's a long history in Ireland where in the 1600s they are saying that they only control the area around Dublin by around 1520. So there's only a small area, and outside that is beyond the Pale. The Pale is the area we're talking about, and within the Pale, it's an urban environment.
How small is it? I know Dublin.
Just about the size of County Dublin, roughly.
So County Dublin was like it has Pale.
And Pale is the fence around it.
And inside this world, they've seen
they would say
wild Irish.
They would say that inside the Pale, they would say it's civilized because it had a city.
Yeah.
That's the.
They were normal.
They were normal, and they said that beyond the pale, it might as well be the Scythian barbarians. They're saying the same thing as Rome. They're saying they're beyond civilization.
But yes, behind, we on our side, all of our side, one stage, we would say actually, in fact, we have a pretty good civilization here.
Well, we
actually think your civilization is a bit backwards.
Yes, so we know for a fact, don't we? That remember I was talking about it. That we have a document from a guy, a papal nuncio, actually in 1526 or something, within a quote from the Irish saying that the Irish think that they're barbarians because they make private property of what are the gifts of God, which is what they mean is things like grass, water.
All right, see if I can jump this one again.
Yeah.
Rome started it with that bad attitude towards the nomads.
Yeah.
They went over and they conquered England, created London, went away. The English came up, adopted that mentality.
Yeah.
They went to Ireland in the 1500s, conquested Ireland, applied that mentality against all the Irish. They left in 1922. The Irish settled people came along, Empire Dublin, adapted the same mentality, turned around and said the exact same things to Irish travellers.
Yeah, so behind the idea that there's a concern. The English, the beginnings of the English Empire in the 1500s was very concerned to exaggerate the Irish movement. If you know what I mean. In other words, they were trying to use the law from Rome to say why it is that they should own the country and not the Irish clans. Let me put it as simple as that. And to do that, they needed to invoke the same thing as happened thousands of years ago. They were trying to say, these people don't have a proper claim on the land because these people move around all the time and don't build stone houses. Therefore, they're the same as barbarians in the old days. They're the same as the Scythians or something. They're just nomads and they're just wild and savage, and there's no civilization here.
In 1992, the Irish government brought out a law that it made it illegal for Irish travellers to be nomadic. In other words, it's a criminal offence for a traveller to be a traveller in Ireland. You will have your home confiscated. I think it's of a €3,000 fine and maybe 12 months or 6 months in prison, or all of the above. So they took what the Romans did to the English and the English did to the Irish and so forth. They turned to 19turn, and we call it the apartheid law. And here is what one of the parts I think of it is that you can move a traveller 5 miles from wherever they are at that present moment. So it wouldn't matter if you're on private, council, or any piece of land. And so when they move you 5 miles, they could follow you in the car and say, we don't want to move you another 5 miles. That would be the law. So to be a traveller is to be almost to be criminalised in 2002 by the Irish state. And that's why I don't want to land you in the whole political arena. But it's killing people today. It's affecting people today.
Yeah.
So you see the boulders, you see the barriers, you see the stakes, you see all the manpower, all the money, all the machinery that has gone in to move travellers, block travellers, stop travellers.
Yes.
That is a English mentality, part of a colonised mentality, and it is not of an indigenous Irish mentality.
No, it wouldn't be. There was never any. There wasn't a reform or an addressing of that. That's what I would agree with that, of course. Yeah. Because from the very beginning in the 1600s, like the land here had been in most of the land had been open because of the pastoral economy we're talking about. The land was open for herds of cattle. There was a case. I mean, I had there was an eyewitness statement of seeing a herds being assembled in Roscommon near Tulsk, when they were assembled from all over Connacht for some kind of big operation. I can't remember what it is, military or otherwise, but it was something to do with the King of Connacht. And they ended up, your man had witnessed herds of something like, I think it was 25,000 cattle, 25,000 head of cattle in the one place. And it's a guess, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Roughly, but there was like miles of them, places like that were like, because people wonder why the king was at Tulsk, but it's just a big flat area.
Yeah.
And it makes sense when you understand the sheer scale of some of the herds that were put together. There were 25.
That system, I'd imagine, if they're clans, I would imagine automatically, again, it would be similar to the Japanese economy, their infrastructure and economics, how do you clang it, the businesses.
We're probably more. Our social structures are similar to Japan, but our mobility is probably a little more mobility than Japan. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I suppose
more reliant on cattle than Japan.
Yeah. But I was thinking in terms of the trade of it, how it might work.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't seem to be individuals, super rich individuals. It seems to be clans. It could be all them cattle are divided up amongst many people.
Yeah, they would. Yeah.
And
Yes.
so it'll make more sense if we put them all in one pasture and we move them all different parts rather than cutting off land, having 10 cows in one field and 1 cow in a big massive field.
The land was only small parts of the land were enclosed, and you could get on, like, you know, the high plains, like the Wild West. This is what the English were saying beyond the pale was the Wild West, literally in the sense that the land was open.
Do you think the Wild West, what they call the Wild West in America, cowboy movies, had something to do with Irish Wild West?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's directly related. The people would study that nowadays. The sense that the idea of the Wild West, the idea of the frontier in the English-speaking world, is the same frontier of the Pale. This is fairly well documented. Like,
no, I didn't ever liked about cowboy films. Well, I love cowboy films. Right? The Trinity movies, the spaghetti westerns, Clint Eastwood. I did like John Wayne. I find out he's a bit of a right wing, but that was his mentality at the time. But what I didn't like about it was shooting Indians. And they had this, even on the image on Hollywood movies, that they were almost doing the world a favor by shooting Indians, that they were the savages. But now when we know, and the Romans said it about the nomads, the English said it about the Irish, and we're saying, no, we're the savages. We're intellectuals compared to you.
Yeah. So I was trying to point out exactly that nomad thing is a bit complicated, because the present state has continued to push this idea that even the name travelers, like in the sense of like they're nomadic, and therefore it implies directly, just like the ancient Romans had, that means they have no claim on the land, no claim on, they're not connected in that way to the land. They don't own it the same way we do, and therefore can be made illegal almost as a culture.
And this is one of the things with the ethnicity campaign and the recognition in 2017 with Enda Kenny, who was a Taoiseach at the time. And he was emphasizing on there would be no legal structures, no investment, nothing. And it was also symbolical. In other words, there wasn't nothing real. Despite we've one of the worst health statistics on the planet, this man was telling us that, no, we're not going to do anything about it. And the reason they didn't give us a formal indigenous recognition of or indigenous culture is because once they removed indigenous, they only left the word ethnic. And under legal definition, ethnic means the people who do not have a land. Well, I might explain this before about people roaming from one place to another, Roma, Gypsies, or you can take ethnic groups, say like African Americans in America, who are not on their own soil, who have been taken, so they're classed as ethnic. Indigenous are the people when they're in the country. So Native Americans would be indigenous people. So they're indigenous to the land. We're saying the traveller mentality and culture is indigenous to Ireland. It once had clan systems, it had castles, it had territories, it had various other systems, education and all that kind of stuff. So to say that travellers are an ethnic group, or to say travellers do not come from the clan system, or travellers are not Irish, or to take away our rights and leave us in limbo dying at 65, is not right. No matter which way you look at it, and it is a form of colonisation. It is colonisation.
Yeah, but once we understand it, we can sort of deal with it. I mean, we've seen them go as far as we've visited some of the castles where they would remove. The castles were a bit annoying, like in the sense to that idea that they were nomadic, and so they had to, because they were stone buildings and were permanent. So they went around systematically demolishing them all.
That's right. If you go on to, I think there's a couple of videos of myself and Dylan when we were down. We were looking for a hidden fortress.
Yeah, so that's one that's sort of
basically
survived.
Yeah, we were down to, I think it was a couple of places, and I had noticed it, that there were one very difficult to find, even if it was the summertime and the place was covered in trees anyway. But I noticed it was kind of a bit like halting sites. They're hidden behind banks, or any way to take the trace or look at them away from Irish settler life, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
And then Dylan was telling me there's actually, he feels or seems or believes that some of them were deliberately bulldozed. Some of them were deliberately hidden away. Why? Because they'd ask who owned the castles. What do you mean who owned the castles? Them castles have the same surname as the travellers.
Exactly.
How did they live back then? Oh my God, they live the same way the travellers are living today. So people get a bit smarter and smarter and realise, oh, for a second, travellers are not an ethnic group. Travellers are the indigenous Irish mentality culture of the island. My God, we're onto a good thing.
Yeah. So it was easy enough to do that, because most Irish people didn't live in castles. Obviously, castles were castles. Obviously, they're small castles, you know what I mean? But Irish people, right up to the recent times in 17th and 18th century, didn't build stone houses. You know what I mean? Stone houses in this country were uncomfortable, damp, dangerous kind of things to live in. You know,
We didn't have toilets either.
No.
How could you live like
so
that?
we lived in wicker or wooden wicker
They left us without toilets long enough, I can tell you.
Yeah, wicker or wooden buildings, you know what I mean? And they were easy to eliminate in terms of the footprint on the land was very eco-friendly. Yeah. And I know, I mean, you know that when you excavate, because Irish Gaelic society in general was very sustainable system, very low impact on it had an impact. The cattle, those masses of cattle probably had a big impact, but it was a self-sustaining system, obviously, because it had been here for thousands of years.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and I will say this, just in case people might know that. The traditional cottage, of course, in those days, in the 17th century, only a few hundred years ago, was called, they were referred to as English houses because they were stone houses. So they were quite different. At that time, they were very new and came with English settlers. And that's them putting claims. Irish people would have copped on eventually that to put a claim on the land, they also have to build a stone house, or else they were just going to be.
I got you.
Yeah.
Your caravan or your trailer was no good. And it's actually the same way when travellers are parked. They say that the mobile home or the wagon is not a fixed permanent building. It's not the same as an English house. Therefore, no matter where you're parked, they move you. And when they move you, they take your land.
That's the problem. The law was never.
Did they do that in America?
It is, I think they did. Yeah.
That's pretty much the same thing, isn't it?
Of course, yeah.
You've done this in quite a few places. And there's quite a lot of stuff we will go into. We're up in time now at the moment. No. But we do hope to get into a lot more about this.
To be said about that.
Tons of stuff. And also, but quite honestly, we want to talk about the movies. My relationship with the Matrix. I watched that movie first. I'm quite honest, it felt like, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I see that. I understand that. And I don't mean that any kind of, I'm film buff and I understand movie or anything, but it was a good description how I was feeling all my life. I also say this, that what drives me, what has driven me since I was 5 years old to get to this point, I don't get paid for this. I've got myself into a lot of trouble with tribal organizations. I fight with the political systems, politics, ideologies, but it's not that I'm a negative person towards people. I've absolutely nothing against that. For me, it's like this big magnetic force field called the settled mentality is constantly pushing its boundaries. It's destroying traveler culture. It went on and destroyed other countries, other civilizations, and it is eventually going to end up conquering Mother Nature, because that's how far much it's being pushed up against people. When you're on the other side of that and that's coming against you, you're left with very high levels of unemployment. You're left with very difficult health statistics right across the board. You're prone to violence, you're prone to drugs, because you're not getting that opportunity to develop. You're expected to be forced into the system and the mentality in the same way as the Romans did it to pretty much everybody, and as the English did it to pretty much everybody, and as they did it to the guys in Dublin, and Dublin had did it to guys in Ireland, and now the rest of Ireland and the rest of the world, with this particular mentality, is trying to force Irish travellers not to be Gaels anymore. That's virtually impossible. It's been 1,224 years, couple of months, few days, few minutes since this first kicked off. We're not giving up now. We're just getting warmed up. But no more violence, no more conflict. We're going to turn this into the arts. We're going to use travel vision as a way of historical healing and benefiting so many people from the settled community, because many people from the settled community, settled is only a mentality. Traveller is only a political label. Genetics does not make us less or more human. We're all people. And the quicker we understand the importance of different mentalities in our own country, I think we'll open up a whole new chapter right around the world, because this is the root cause of a lot of the world's problems. I love going on around lately.
That's a good one to go along with that. Well done.
You happy with that?
Yes, thank you.
Take care, folks. We'll hope to see you again next Sunday. If you want to give us some suggestions or get in touch for our questions. Actually, someone did ask me on Twitter. You don't mind if I answer this quickly?
Yeah, go
on. I forget the person's. Well, actually, one of those names on Twitter, but it seems to be genuine persons and asking me what's the difference between racism, Irish travellers, and racism, as in colour-coded racism. That's not even an easy question, but I'm going to give you my own personal quick opinion on it.
Right.
We can never take anything away from what has happened to other indigenous people around the world. In other words, white people did come to their lands, their shores, and created havoc, genocides. Millions, if not billions, of people over time were slaughtered by white Europeans. There's no escaping that fact. And for that, it's a terrible thing to know that we had that profound effect on the world. when we narrow it down to a little bit more, and this is like throwing the rest of the Europeans under the bus in a way, Ireland, even go back hundreds of years, even go back thousands of years, was a indigenous ethnic minority community. In other words, we weren't even the same as our European tribes. We had a different mentality. We accepted this one as our norm, our civilization. But unfortunately, colonization has left devastating effects right around the world, and it still does today. Any English-speaking country, Mr. Robson, I'm saying too much. I'm going to finish off quickly, but my point I'm trying to get across is that there's so much more that I feel we can do, and it's not hostile. It's not negative towards people or the state. It's about alleviation of all the psychological pressures that are being placed upon people, including settled people, because settled people are hurting just as much as
we can probably talk about that thing some other time. I think that
no, I'm on a roll. I'm going to be here all night.
No, that's
folks. Yeah, well,
colour-y thing you're talking about, the whole business to do with that.
Yeah, I think we will. We'll spend a bit of time on it, but it's an interesting one. Yeah. Okay. Like I said, take nothing away from other indigenous people.
No. There's a long story, but you can do it in terms of we can lead in the direction of what you asked about the Wild West. So you can do that sometime, you know what I mean? To do it to like colonizing America. That's what that's to do with.
So there are the definitions about what racism is. But like I said to you, we're coming from a perspective that's never been talked about before. So therefore, maybe the definition could be redefined. Because I'm not taking anything away from other indigenous groups. I'm saying that travellers had apartheid laws used against them. Travellers were segregated by a system through politics, where we're left to die, unemployment, because we wouldn't accept a particular mentality, which was a colonized mentality. In the same way, other indigenous people would not accept various other colonial powers.
So all I'd say is that story, when you're talking about racism, eventually becomes associated purely with colour.
Yeah.
But that develops in the Caribbean, as we know.
That's right.
But the story of the Caribbean, in the English-speaking world now, it's important to differentiate. The story of that kind of development of empire and slavery and all that kind of stuff in the English-speaking world begins in Ireland. So if you study a bit about Ireland, you kind of understand the origin to some extent of that.
Well, that's what I said before.
It doesn't begin with Africans. It begins in Ireland.
Yeah, Ireland is in one way the birthplace of colonialism. It was assembled, it was manufactured, it was experimented on for hundreds of years.
Yeah. So English colonialism.
English colonialism. And again, not anti-English. What happened, it's not about scoring points or playing the victim. We want a way out, not just for travellers, but also for settled people. Indeed, hopefully, other people around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope to talk to you again next Sunday. And keep well. And may the force be with you.
Yeah.
I think you turn it off and damn it.
Yeah.
Just close it. There, hit that cross. There. We're getting there, folks.